we having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the results of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This Honorable Senate for Friday, 2nd day of July, 2021. And before we begin the business of the day, colleagues, I draw your attention to the fact that we have an extremely special guest with us this morning. It is the new High Commissioner for the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Her Excellency Dr. Maureen Tamuno, who presented her credentials to the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs this Tuesday, I believe, and to the Governor General. Her Excellency is a former legislator, and consequently, we have invited her to join us in the chamber. She is a businesswoman, an academic, and a gender activist. I think that is the word that's used nowadays to describe someone who advocates for women. In fact, she sat on a number of organizations in the Commonwealth and, believe it or not, attended a conference in Uganda with our own Miss Curtis, I think a couple years ago. So she's not someone who is unacquainted with Jamaica. So, High Commissioner, we welcome you to Jamaica. Your predecessor, High Commissioner Janet Oleso, was someone who we were very close with, and we trust that the relationships between our two countries will continue to grow from strength to strength. I ask the Senate also to welcome members of the High Commission staff and members from the Nigerian business community in Jamaica. And I think I recognize Professor Dr. Ernest Madu and his son Chris and his wife Dana Baugh. There are a number of other persons, and I ask you just to welcome them again. Thank you very much. Minister Johnson-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome Her Excellency here this morning to our Honourable Chamber, as well as, of course, members of her staff at the High Commission and members of the Nigerian community here. We have spoken already, Mr. President, about the perfection and timing between our nations right now. We have heard some of the experience and skills held by Her Excellency. She's a former businesswoman, CEO of an oil company. She is a former legislator, member of parliament, and runs an NGO that empowers young women, teaches them skills so that they are able to earn for themselves and achieve economic independence and, of course, build their self-confidence. Her general outlook and her insistence and commitment to achieving solid and defensible outcomes in everything she does bode well for the relationship between the Federal Republic of Nigeria and Jamaica. as it comes at a time, her appointment comes at a time when we have had Foreign Minister Oneyama visit less than a year ago. We had the opportunity to discuss matters of tourism, increased trade and investment, as well as increased technical cooperation between our countries. We know that the TAC is strong. We know that our shared aesthetic in respect of arts and craft, which help to build our community engagement in tourism, that these are all areas in which we have lots of potential at this point in time. So we very much welcome her, not only to this Honourable Chamber, but to Jamaica. We welcome her with our hearts, and we welcome her with a ready list of objectives at hand. So we look forward to continuing to work together, High Commissioner, and we look forward to continuing our engagement with your team and our brothers and sisters in the Federal Republic when I next go. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, may I, on behalf of the opposition, also extend a warm welcome to Her Excellency and to her team. Mr. President, having met her and having read about her, I believe that Jamaica is honored by her appointment to this country because her achievements are legendary. She has demonstrated that she's a fearless and powerful woman who is known for excellence in every area that she has experienced, and there are many. I was particularly moved by the fact that she had started an NGO to care for widows, orphans, and the downtrodden, because that is what focuses us on her, what drives and motivates her contribution to politics, because indeed she has been a member of parliament in Nigeria, and she has been the Nigerian female representative to the Commonwealth Women's Parliamentary Association, but which is where she actually met our clerk. But Mr. President, whatever she does, she throws her entire heart in it, and it's a good heart. It is a heart that is people-centered. As a member of parliament, she did many things which were legendary and legend projects, and I know that the people of Nigeria celebrate her for that. We know that her emphasis now is on opening up communications with Nigeria. We know that her emphasis will be to connect Nigeria, Jamaica, and the rest of the world using Jamaica as a central point. And that is highly appropriate because there's so much that connects us. We Jamaicans are rooted in their African origin. And as the leader said, their West African origin. And we have many things in common: our culture, our outlook, our music, our food, and indeed, as I am told, our love of shopping. So, Mr. President, Jamaica is fortunate. And I say to Her Excellency that I'm already quite clear that her assignment here will result in good fortune for us. I hope that you enjoy Jamaica. We welcome you warmly, and we welcome your team, and look forward to meeting you on many more occasions. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, members. Statements by ministers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have two brief statements to give this morning by way of update on matters which had previously been brought before this House. But allow me to just start by saying that on behalf of the members of this side, I'm sure shared by the other side, that we hold in our prayers this morning our brothers and sisters in the Windward Islands, and in particular Barbados and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who are now being impacted by the recently upgraded Category 1 Hurricane Elsa. We certainly wish them and their people safe passage through the storm. We do hope that its impact will weaken in short order, as it is a fast-moving storm, and that it will pass over them with little damage. So I ask that the Chamber note and send up those prayers that have not yet been sent. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, before you begin, would you excuse the High Commissioner and myself?
Absolutely, Mr. President. Yes, Mr. President, on the first matter, members of the Senate, copies will be circulated. Members of the Senate will recall that in February 2021, I had informed this chamber that work was underway towards finalizing the operational protocols associated with the implementation of the agreement between the Government of the United States and the Government of Jamaica concerning cooperation in suppressing illicit maritime drug trafficking, commonly referred to as the Shipwrighter Agreement. I also informed that although that the Government of Jamaica and the US government had agreed on the majority of proposed protocols, there were still a handful of issues that needed to be settled, and these would be worked on. So I wish to advise, to update this House, that the Jamaican officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and National Security, as well as the Attorney General's Chambers, Jamaica Defence Force, and the Director of Public Prosecutions, had met again with senior officials on the 24th of March 2021. And following further exchanges at that meeting and thereafter, both sides agreed on changes to the operational protocols necessary to improve the functioning of the agreement. These new procedures, which are internal to the security and legal operations on both sides, they became effective as of June 16, 2021. With the finalization of the operational protocols, Mr. President, both parties, both countries, stand to benefit from an improvement in the sharing of critical information and in the process of interception of vessels suspected of being involved in drug-related criminal activities at sea. The protocols also allow the Government of Jamaica to achieve its goals of strengthening the fight against illicit drug-related activities, while at the same time protecting the interests of Jamaican citizens who may be intercepted at sea pursuant to the agreement. It is hoped that with these improved procedures, the challenges experienced in recent cases will not be repeated. Mr. President, I assure this chamber that the representatives on both sides engaged in constructive dialogue and written exchanges in a spirit of cooperation and comity. Furthermore, work to improve systems that give effect to the agreement will not stop here. Indeed, the agreement itself provides for consultation to ensure its smooth operationalization, and the new protocols provide for a minimum regularity of exchanges, with scope for additional consultations as necessary. We will use these opportunities to ensure that the rights of Jamaican nationals are respected and upheld at all stages of the process, and assuring the effectiveness of these security operations. These additional protocols will undoubtedly deepen Jamaica's cooperation with the United States of America in these matters. Finally, let me take this opportunity to re-emphasize Jamaica's firm commitment to engaging with our international partners in the fight against the use of our waters for trafficking purposes. This remains a critical part of breaking the back of serious and organized crime in Jamaica, and is therefore to the benefit of each and every law-abiding Jamaican citizen, whose rights must never be subordinated to those of the criminal elements among us. I thank you, Mr. President. I was just going to take the two, but that's fine.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Bunting.
Mr. President, I thank the Minister for the update on this matter. We've had a few discussions previously, and we welcome the fact that the new protocols are now agreed. It's always a balancing act between giving law enforcement additional tools in the fight against illicit drug trafficking, while at the same time protecting the interests of Jamaican citizens who may be intercepted at sea and for whom the government of Jamaica waives its jurisdiction on Jamaican flag vessels. It appeared that in the last instance we discussed that some time had passed in the monitoring or between the interception and the approval or the waiving of the jurisdiction and the follow-up on the circumstances of the Jamaican nationals who had been taken into custody by the United States. And I note specifically the penultimate paragraph of the Minister's statement where she speaks to the new protocols providing for, I quote, a minimum regularity of exchanges with scope for additional consultations as necessary. If the Minister would just go a little further, since this was really a bone of contention the last time the matter was discussed, and share what this minimum regularity means in terms of almost what I would think would be a continuous monitoring of the status of the Jamaican nationals. Is this something that would be done on a weekly basis, or what is this minimum period? Just to go a little further than what the statement says, can you tell us what that aspect of the protocols? I know sometimes these protocols are confidential, or it wouldn't be appropriate to share all the features. But what we're talking about is post waiving of jurisdiction, persons being in custody. And at that point, I just would like the Minister to reassure us that this minimum regularity would not be, say, once a year, but this would have to share with us the frequency or the cycle of monitoring, minimum monitoring that our consulates or embassies would utilize. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the question. I do think, however, that you're conflating issues. There is the consultation provided for under the agreement, which is what I've referred to in the statement, which had no framework around it. We have now set a minimum annual consultation in respect of the status of the agreement and our operations. That is the minimum consultation on the agreement. That is not, yes, that's exactly what is stated in the statement, which is quite different from our consular activity, which is part of the work of the consulate. What we have done through the protocols is ensure that any gaps that existed in terms of informing the consulate in respect of the detentions which have taken place and the timing of their landing. And thereafter, that is the work that then becomes the normal work of the consulate or the embassy in respect of.
But I was just wondering, is there some minimum monitoring cycle for that?
No, we don't have a minimum monitoring cycle for that. That is the work of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. There is always an open line. Persons who are detained have a right to call the consulate once they have an issue or a concern. We conduct consular visits, and we have, in fact, improved, I believe, our oversight. You know that there are very many persons of Jamaican descent that are detained in the state, so it's quite a bit. So to even contemplate that we would be doing weekly visits is beyond the resources of a small country such as ours. But there is the right for them to reach out. There are regular visits and inquiries made by the consular authorities. And in respect of the detention, because remember, persons detained under the shipwrighter is one percentage. I mean, it's a very small percentage of the Jamaicans detained at large, who are the responsibility of the consular authority, our consular authorities there. So there is, however, improvement in terms of the exchange of information in respect of individuals detained under this process. I would prefer not to share any further and just to give the assurance. The protocols that have been agreed are as between the different agencies of government on the US side that are responsible for the different stages of interception, detention, and prosecution, and also on the Jamaican side in respect of our framework as defined by the relevant legislation.
Minister, thank you for clarifying the revision or the monitoring of the agreement versus the individuals. But as you said, while there may be, I don't know, a large number of Jamaicans who were either arrested in the U.S. jurisdiction or perhaps extradited from our jurisdiction, but in the vast majority of those cases, they would have had an interface with the court system. Certainly, if they were in our jurisdiction, in Jamaican jurisdiction, they would normally have a right to a hearing in a Jamaican court, an extradition hearing. This is unique in that, in a sense, the jurisdiction is waived without that 1% or probably less than 1% having an opportunity to have a hearing in a Jamaican court. This is why I believe there is an added responsibility, and whether it is an administrative responsibility of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or it would be captured in the protocols. But all I'm saying is that in this very small number, because I don't think it has been, we could probably, certainly in my time, it was a relatively small number, a single-digit number of persons per year, or if it was double-digit, it was less than 20. So it's a relatively small number, just to monitor them between waiving the jurisdiction of our Jamaican flag vessel and getting them into the formal law enforcement system or judicial system in the U.S. to ensure that the shipwrighter agreement protocols are observed during that process.
Yes, that is what happens. That is what is preserved by the protocols. But I know you will understand if I don't share the details. We have improved the exchange of information. We recognize the challenges that occur when ships are on the high seas, but we have provided for how and to whom information is to be shared at appropriate stages of the process, starting at interception. I think the process is much approved, and I can't say we look forward to its effective implementation in the sense that one would wish that there weren't need for it. But certainly where there is need, we do trust that what has now been agreed through, again, cooperation, collaboration, and committee, that it will work to good effect, and they do provide for a solid balance between the rights of our citizens and their interface with the legal system, which must occur with due process and under the Constitution of the U.S. as well. Their entitlements, once they are landed on U.S. soil, all kick in and are well monitored thereafter. So thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Brown.
Thank you, sir. Minister, your statement, certainly on page 2, spoke to at the same time protecting the interests of Jamaican citizens. And it said it is hoped that these improved procedures, that with these improved procedures, the challenges experienced in recent cases will not be repeated. Am I correct that the recent cases you're talking about involved those 5 fishermen who alleged that they were stripped naked treated very badly on one of the Coast Guard, and another case being the Lady Lawler case. And would you confirm that both of these, arising from both of these cases, there are matters in court? And could you tell us if the protocol signed exclude the government of Jamaica from assisting in any way the people who are taking court action against the U.S. relative to the Lady Lawler and the 5 fishermen? I start with that one.
Mr. President, while the member may have an interest in advocating for the rights of alleged dons and other such persons, I just wish to assure
just on a point of order. I have no interest in defending any don more than Dudos.
Mr. President.
Proceed, Minister.
Mr. President, the matters which I referred to in my statement are the case of the Josette, in respect of which the public of Jamaica is aware that a case was brought by the ACLU on their behalf. I'm not aware of a case in respect of the Lady Lawler, if one has occurred, but those are the two circumstances to which I referred, which are the ones which have been before this chamber. I'm not sure I caught the rest of the question.
The rest of the question is whether or not the protocol you have signed, or the government have signed, forbid you from supporting these Jamaicans who have been wronged by the U.S. authority.
Mr. President, the protocols deal with the implementation of the shipwrighter agreement and do not relate to any legal process on behalf of persons who have been detained on suspicion of participation in criminal drug-related activity under the agreement.
That's it, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would now wish to just proceed with my statement in respect of the other matter on the agenda, which is the implementation of the apostille process pursuant to Jamaica's accession to the Hague Convention abolishing, I see there's a typo here, abolishing the requirement for legalization for foreign public documents, 1961. And this document, or rather this convention, we will refer to as the Apostille Convention. So, Mr. President, the Senate will recall that in November last year, we passed the Authentication Foreign Public Documents Bill to implement the convention abolishing the requirement of legalization for foreign public documents. This act provided the legislative framework for the accession and implementation of the Apostille Convention. Mr. President, by way of reminder, generally, a public document that is intended for use in a foreign country requires verification by a public authority in the country of origin of the document. This requirement comes from the fact that the recipient in the foreign country will not be able to verify the official capacity of the person signing it, or the authenticity of the signature and the seal or stamp that it bears. This need for verification, Mr. President, gives rise to the process of legalization, which is ordinarily facilitated through foreign affairs ministries, high commissions, embassies, and consulates. As it is now, Mr. President, that is as at today, for documents issued in Jamaica, my ministry is responsible for carrying out the process of authentication, after which the diplomatic mission of the receiving country accredited to Jamaica legalizes the document. Costs are involved on both sides, and in some instances, several intermediary steps are required, which vary across different national systems. So you can understand, Mr. President, the inconvenience and cost experienced by individuals seeking to have their documents verified in a foreign country. This has not been good for individuals, and it has not been good for business, Mr. President, because sometimes the process is not only time-consuming, cumbersome, and frustrating, but it's often confusing and uncertain as well, given the many differences. Mr. President, the situation becomes even more stressful when the documents are intended for use in multiple jurisdictions. The Apostille Convention was established to simplify this process and replace the traditional requirement of authentication and legalization with a single formality, namely the issuance of an authentication certificate called an apostille. And this is issued by an authority designated by the state in which the public document originated. I'm therefore very pleased this morning to announce that the Hague Apostille Convention enters into force for Jamaica tomorrow, July 3rd, 2021. The Authentication Foreign Public Documents Act will enter into operation on Monday, July 5th, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade will therefore start to issue apostilles on that day. That is Monday, July 5th. Apostilles will be used to authenticate documents for use in all of the 120 countries who are also party to the convention. We'll call them participating countries. They run across all legal systems. The regular authentication process will continue for those countries not a party to the convention. And documents intended for use in participating countries that were legalized or authenticated prior to entry into force of the convention for Jamaica will of course remain valid and can continue to be used in those countries. I want to express strong appreciation to the ministry team that has been working very hard, Mr. President, on making sure that we could start to deliver this improved service as soon as the convention approved us so to do. Members of the Consular Department and the Legal Department at the Ministry, Mr. Andre Kaur, Mrs. Ariel Bowen, Ms. Desiree Taylor, Ambassador Sharon Saunders, they have all been absolutely critical. Ms. Angela Rose Howell, the new addition to the team, Mr. Franz Hall, they have been absolutely important. And the support of former Permanent Secretary Ambassador Marcia Gilbert Roberts and the current Permanent Secretary Ambassador Sheila Sealy-Monteith have been indispensable. Our stakeholders, led by the Ministry of Justice, the Registrar General's Department, and so many others, have also been of great support. I am just noting, Mr. President, that I see him. Well, let me hope that that has been addressed elsewhere. Mr. President, ministries, departments, and agencies have been advised, together with missions overseas. Sensitization sessions have been underway, and information will be published in our daily newspapers starting this weekend. This will include the website where the list of participating countries can be identified and the email address from which the application form can be obtained until it is on our website. So allow me to share some quick pointers. The apostille form, the application form, will be easily obtained by emailing apostille, apostille, at mfaft.gov.gm. That is the end of all our email addresses at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. And we will advise as soon as it's available on our website. It will also be available at the reception desk at the Ministry, which is, of course, now located at 2 Port Royal Street, right down here in downtown Kingston. Participating countries can be found through a quick Google search, but of course officially through www.hcch.net. And of course you click on English and on Instruments, and you will find the conventions and the status of countries under it. With the traditional process, Mr. President, only the Foreign Ministry or overseas missions can authenticate and legalize documents. And in keeping with the usual international practice, especially for smaller states, apostilles can only be issued by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. I believe there's one country that doesn't, might be another. Whether for authentication or obtaining an apostille, certifying entities will continue to play an integral role in the process. For example, a document that would have in the past required notarization and then would have been subject to the authentication and legalization process, if intended for use in a country that is a member of the Apostille Convention, a party to it, it would still require notarization. So instead, however, after that notarization, instead of authentication and legalization by Foreign Affairs and by the counterpart mission overseas, the ministry would now simply affix an apostille to that notarized document, which would be recognized overseas. So for the avoidance of doubt, notaries public will continue to perform their traditional notarial acts, and justices of the peace will also continue to provide their respective services. Furthermore, where a document requires pre-certification by an intermediary authority, for example, the Ministry of Education always has to certify that academic certificates are in fact valid, those authorities must provide, or rather clients must obtain that authority's pre-certification before coming to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade for the issuance of an apostille, just as they would now. So what is simplified is the process after, the process at the ministry and the process after. The fees for an apostille will be 3,500 Jamaican dollars per document for 5-day processing service. And although this is an increase in the fee paid to the ministry, this new process will remove all of the additional costs that have been associated with authentication and legalization of documents by foreign embassies and consulates. And it will also, of course, remove the opportunity cost of the number of spaces that have to be navigated. So the implementation of this service will therefore be a major improvement and will result in significant savings and convenience to our clients. And I have a little outline of how you can apply, so that if persons are listening and they're interested, if you are here in Jamaica, you simply can visit the reception desk at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where you'll be directed to pay the fee right at the cashier's window. After payment, you go back to the desk with your application form, your receipt, your TRN, and the document to be apostilled. And if you're abroad, you can submit your completed application form. You can pay and the documents to be apostilled. You can submit them at the nearest Jamaican High Commission embassy or consulate, or you can send them directly via courier to the Consular Affairs Department of the Ministry right here in Jamaica, provided that you also provide a prepaid self-addressed courier label and envelope that will allow us to send it back to you without any challenges. The form, of course, in respect of overseas, can also be obtained physically at the embassy or consulate, or it will be available by email or downloadable from their websites. Mr. President, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of Jamaica continues to work assiduously to improve its processes and its services to the people of Jamaica, as we continue to be the official intergovernmental link between Jamaica and the world. The new apostille process is yet another major achievement to be celebrated by Jamaicans, as this government seeks to make Jamaica the place to live, work, and do business. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, I want to thank the Minister for the statement which she has made, which updates us on the state of this legislation, and in particular to advise us that the Hague Apostille Convention actually enters into force tomorrow on the 3rd of July. It is very important to note that this legislation, which we debated not so long ago, will enter into force on the 5th of July. It was made very clear while we were debating this matter that there would be a streamlining of the operations, as this will be utilized. This apostille would be utilized in 120 countries and would result in significant costs. So I rise to applaud the information. Pardon me? And I am reminded that I'm to also acknowledge the cost savings, even though the amount of fees paid to the ministry have been increased. But, President, I particularly wanted to understand the sensitization process, which I understand is already underway, because I am aware that the Association of Notaries Public do have some concerns about the implementation of this legislation. And there are some reservations on their part about exactly how effective it will be in ridding ourselves of the cumbersome process. As they have expressed, they feel that it is not really going to alleviate some of the problems which they are experiencing. Minister, reading your statement and going through the steps, it has occurred to me that it might be a misunderstanding of the processes. And so I would like to ask, has any sensitization taken place with the notaries public? And if not, is it intended that this be done?
Thank you for your question. It is certainly an important one, because what is quite clear to me when the matter came to my attention first this week, that there was a complete misunderstanding of what the process was. And in fact, I believe there were persons who had said they weren't even aware of the bill, notwithstanding that it had been debated in both houses, it had been on Smile Jamaica TVJ and on the interviews on the radio stations that have the widest listenerships, etc. And but we understand that public communication does not guarantee that everyone is aware of these matters. Certainly, in respect of the notaries public, the party to our sensitization, who we understood was responsible for notaries public, was the Registrar of the Supreme Court, who has responsibility, as you know, for authenticating the very signatures of notaries public themselves. The sensitization sessions have been held with the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Education, Health and Wellness, Justice, the Supreme Court, the Registrar General's Department, Bureau of Standards, National Standards and Regulatory Authority, Constabulary Force, Jamaica Intellectual Properties Organization, Companies Office of Jamaica, PICA, Tax Administration of Jamaica Island, Traffic Authority, we, however, don't have a difficulty with having. I had asked for some information to pull together to send to them, which would clarify some matters. I think that given that the notaries public don't change anything in respect of what they do, they continue to notarize documents which continue to come to us. The process changes and simplifies thereafter. It is ministries of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade who authenticate documents now, and who will continue to do so. They will simply do so by a simplified process, which will not require the person seeking authentication to also seek legalization and authentication from the corresponding country in which the documents are to be used. And that is where the costs are removed, that is where the simplification is removed, as well as what we have to do internally. So notaries continue to notarize as they would normally, but when they come to us, the process then is streamlined. So I hope that they will hear and understand that their responsibilities do not change at all as a result of this process. Thank you.
Minister, I appreciate your clarification, but may I just make a suggestion that a note to the Notaries Public Association might just be useful, so that any kind of concerns might be allayed. You know, the President is a notary public as well as myself, so we will do also what is necessary to communicate the distinction which you have elucidated. But just a note would be useful, even if you request a registrar to so advise. Thank you, Minister.
Not a difficulty. We will write. It's just that when I had asked the team to just pull together some information for them, they then wrote. So the process now became answering the letter. So we will write to them. It's not a difficulty at all. Thank you. And there will be, an effort to push more information now as well to sensitize the public further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following: Ministry Paper number 44 of 2021 and annual reports of the SCJ Holdings Limited for the years October 2010 to September 30, 2011, and October 2011 to March 2012. Ministry Paper number 45 of 2021 on annual report on audited financial statements of the National Irrigation Commission for the year 2017-2018. Annual report on audited financial statements of the Jamaica Bauxite Institute Limited for the year 2019-2020. And annual report on audited financial statements of the Jamaica Railway Corporation for the year 2017-2018.
Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives to the Honourable Senate. I have the honour to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 29th day of June 2021, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Casino Gaming Act was passed in the House of Representatives. Signed, Marisa Dalrymple Philibert MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Mr. President, I signify my willingness to take charge of the bill.
Thank you.
A bill shortly entitled the Casino Gaming Amendment Act 2021, read a first time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
Thank you. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, the presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained, public business. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, normally we would proceed with the legislative agenda before the continuation of the State of the Nation debate. But today we have the late arrival of some technical staff that Minister has asked that we proceed with the State of the Nation debate first. So if you would accommodate, Mr. President, that we take that agenda item first and then the two bills, one of which is quite short, I would be obliged.
And who is to present today?
Senator Longmore, Senator Dr. Sophia Longmore.
Thank you. Senator Longmore.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues.
Before you start, I should say happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It is not often that we get to address the Honourable Senate on our birthdays, so we cherish the moment with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It is cherished. It is cherished. No, and it is not just mine. We're quite a few Cancerians here. So yesterday was Senator Leslie Campbell's. Last week was Senator Campbell Rodriguez, and I think next week is Senator Auburn Hills. Tomorrow.
And nobody on the other side of the house have birth. Floyd. 23rd?
Yes.
No man, that's creeping into August. That don't count.
So I thank you, and I thank you on behalf of everyone. Mr. President, I rise to make my contribution to the State of the Nation debates. Firstly, gratitude is a must, and I must thank you and my colleagues here in the Senate on both sides of the aisle for having been there and continuing to be there in every which way. I want to thank the staff for always being available and being so very supportive. And I wish all the best to our clerk. I would like to thank the Most Honorable Prime Minister Andrew Michael Holness for my reappointment to this very privileged position of service. I want to thank my family, who are my reason, and I want to thank my very good friend, my sister friend, Dr. Kayla Davis MacDonald, Dr. Kayla Davis, who is sitting in the gallery today and is here for my birthday. Thank you, and thank you for welcoming her. I would have greeted the new Nigerian High Commissioner, but she seemed to have left the chambers. Lastly, but most importantly, I give thanks to the universe for giving me this moment and many others. Mr. President, like the rest of the world, Jamaica has been hit with one of the greatest disasters that humanity has ever experienced. With every crisis, though, comes opportunity, and with every cloud, there is a silver lining. And if we were to focus on that silver lining, that will become our reality. The COVID pandemic has caused many upheavals in our daily lives, as individuals, as families, as communities, as nations, and as the world. Very few things hit as a pandemic does. But likewise, there is great opportunity that can be had, because my silver lining is that COVID has given us what we oftentimes does not have: time. Time to reflect, time to plan, time to revise, and time to execute. There is opportunity, Mr. President, to build back stronger and better. Mr. President, I think it is safe that we can all recognize that there's another level of appreciation for the value of the health of our people. And might I say that the wealth of a nation is highly reflected in the health of that nation. It is no secret that after decades of deterioration and lack of investment, much needs to be done to bring the Jamaica's healthcare standard to one which competes with what can be acquired in some places overseas. But in doing so, we must recognize that there is great value in what we have here. I myself can vouch for that. With the personnel, especially, and the workers in our health sector, most of whom are reflective of being highly professional and capable individuals, and especially at this time have risen to the task and carried significant water in baskets in this past year and a half. To all our frontline workers, from the porters to the lab technicians, to the physiotherapists, to the radiographers, to the nurses, and to the doctors, being part of the fraternity, I understand fully the challenges, and I thank you for your service. Mr. President, one other lesson that is clear from this pandemic is that it takes cash to care. And so the efforts of our Prime Minister to see to the economic recovery plan by establishing in April 2020 the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Task Force was an act of foresight seeking to ensure a response to any adverse social and economic fallout that may be due to the pandemic, all in an effort to ensure that we're able to build back stronger. As my colleague said, Senator Webby last week in his opening, there have been significant strides with respect to the economic forecasts of Jamaica that has projected growth of as much of 9% for the second quarter of 2021 and 48% for the fiscal year of 2021. Mr. President, with international net reserves being set at $3.42 billion, the highest sustained levels of international reserves in the country's history, I hope that in seeking to build back stronger, we consider such findings as recently the Capri report. Excuse me. Which found that 30% of the staff in complement being present in our child mental health services. We see that there is great need for us to invest in the professionals that are there to address the needs of the society. Our own homegrown professionals who perform at the highest standards and as such can choose to go elsewhere but remain here in the hope that they will build Jamaica and not be a part of the brain drain phenomenon. It is imperative that in these economic gains, we seek to act preventively in addressing some of the issues that we face as a society. Mr. President, one other little thing that I might add in terms of the economy is a little bit on just an observation on my part, where we import so much. Every container that comes in with imports, there's a trade route already established on. We need to reverse the trade route. Every container that comes in can be filled with something going back. And there are established trade routes to bring it in. Let us send something back. And that's what I will say on that. Mr. President, despite the necessary focus on the COVID-19 pandemic and the other health needs of the Jamaican people still had to be met, and were addressed with a healthcare delivery that continued as we saw initiatives to address non-communicable diseases that contribute to the mortality and morbidity, an economic burden in the Caribbean and Jamaica accounting for 56% of death annually. We saw continued implementation of the Inter-American Development Bank loan to support the health systems. Strengthening for prevention and care, management of non-communicable disease programs, launch of the public-private partnership for NCDs, which engage private general practitioners in shared management of primary care clients with hypertension or diabetes. There was commencement of the phase 1 of the glycosylated A1C program to enhance point-of-care testing for glucose control of primary care clients with diabetes. And what this does is that it gives you a reflection of the level of control of the diabetic, which is very critical in their care. Formation of the Sickle Cell Management Subcommittee to provide technical support to improve Jamaica's sickle cell disease program. Cabinet approval for a proposal of the exemption of fees at public pharmacies for all persons with sickle cell disease, and launch of a national committee on non-communicable diseases, which includes a mental health component. Senator Allen, we saw a continuation of the integrated vector program. We cannot forget about the chikungunya virus and the Zika virus and all those other viruses that may impact our lives. There was a main thrust still of the vector control program to decrease the population of the vectors, main one being the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which alone transmits Zika, dengue, and chikungunya. Activities continued of destroying breeding sites, treatment of containers to destroy larvae, destruction of adult mosquitoes through space spraying, fogging, and of course, operational research. Mr. President, our national HIV and STI program continued to affect lives with the prevalence of which still being at about 1.4% among the general population. However, it is shown that the sex worker population, there is an increased rate of HIV presence, as well as in the population of men who have sex with men. There is an approximately 6.9% prevalence in inmates with HIV present, and the 2015 survey reflected that there are 13.9% of persons who are homeless with HIV. These reflect some of the most vulnerable members of our society. Mr. President, the mortality rate from AIDS has declined from 17.6% per 100,000 in 2011 to 13.6% in 2016. With about 32,000 persons living with HIV in Jamaica at the end of 2020, the country achieved its targets for the prevention of mother-to-child transmission with HIV being at 1.2%. which is quite significant in management of the disease. In continuing the service delivery in healthcare, Mr. President, we saw where the Inter-American Bank and the government of Jamaica had negotiated a loan agreement to see an improved health system efficiency in Jamaica, with the objective of supporting systematic strengthening. This is a hybrid program with a policy-based operation that will invest in the physical infrastructure and equipment of Jamaica's health sector. There are different components, namely the organized consolidation of integrated health service networks, where there will be financing the purchasing of medical equipment and improvement of infrastructure for primary care services in catchment areas of 3 priority hospitals to increase their capacity in health promotion and disease prevention, especially regarding chronic non-communicable diseases. This investment, Senator Campbell, will focus on strengthening the diagnostic and screening capability, as well as clinical and resolute capacity of the health clinics. Another component will be improving the management quality and efficiency of the health services, where technical assistance will be provided to design and implement the chronic care model and participate in health service networks that develop care pathways and protocols. Mr. President, you also will be seeing the funding of the 4th Jamaica Health and Lifestyle Survey, a significant research document that helps to guide and shed light on the real issues that persons may be facing in our society and the status of very critical elements. There will be significant strengthening of telehealth, telemedicine, and telemonitoring capacity through the expansion of community health outreach model. Mr. President, the COVID-19 pandemic saw where our public health facilities were still functioning, though there was a scale down of its activities. There were over 2,800,000 visits to the public health facilities, and mostly there was a reduction in some of the services acquired, excepting for surgeries performed. There was actually a 34.4% increase in the number of surgeries that were performed. Let me make sure I have that correct. Sorry, it was a 34.4% reduction in outpatient visits and a 7.5% increase in the total surgeries performed, which actually reflects that during the pandemic, there was an increased efficiency for some of the very critical life-saving procedures that were able to be done because of the less load in the outpatient clinics. And what happens then is that, and this piece of information is really very critical in terms of the service delivery, because a person who may have, let's say, gallstones, and this is causing great pain and ache and so forth, because the gallstones is not inflamed and ready to rupture or so. They're not an emergency, so they may have, or somebody with uterine fibroids. It's not an emergency, so they have to wait until operating space becomes available. So these are now elective surgeries. So what you see here is a reflection, because there was less load for the doctors to be out in the clinics, they were now able to attend to some of the more critical surgeries, impacting people's lives in very significant ways. Because you know, when grandma must go get her fibroid out, and she finally gets it done, after waiting months, it's a huge relief. Not just for grandma medically, but for the family that cares for her. So we did continue, despite, Mr. President, the fact that great focus had to be placed on the COVID-19 pandemic. The health system maintained an effort to ensure that we build back stronger and better. You all know I'm a psychiatrist, and mental health is always one of my main focus. I'm not going to be a patient. Mr. President, when it comes to mental health, and I'm just going to get a little bit put on the academic hat here. When it comes on to mental health, when you're treating someone with a mental illness, you address not just the emotional issues, you address the social issues, you address the spiritual issues, you address the physical issues. I won't go into the physical because that's dealt with otherwise, but it is also very critical. Now, the social issues, very, very impacting. And oftentimes when you hear us speak of community mental health and resources in the community, it is really not the medical professional, but more so the persons who address and help to deal with the other aspects that impacts on what that medical professional has to deal with. So you can write a prescription for risperidone or olanzapine repeatedly, but if the child remains in an abusive home, if the discontent where the father is negatively interacting with his adult son, that person will still seek to go to smoke marijuana or drink alcohol to cope with the issues there. If the person is unemployed, if it's a person oftentimes is a young individual who would want to go and get a job but can't, would want to seek to be able to contribute but can't. It's a frustrating reality. And so these paramedical services, these other services that are critical that we focus on. So I was really very encouraged when the same economic task force that the Prime Minister formulated made recommendations of expansion of the social safety net, while at the same time ensuring its efficiency and transparency. Initiatives of investment in vulnerable population through a social protection program must be recognized, Mr. President, with continuation of poor relief, with assistance for children to attend school, the elderly, persons experiencing homelessness, persons having health impairments, and those temporarily displaced by natural or man-made disasters. We have seen a renovation of a number of infirmaries, Mr. President. Prior to the efforts of this administration, the only other period that reflected some effort at maintenance and rehabilitation work was between 2003 and 2013. And even then, there were no structured program to finance or guide what was done. It is since 2016 that an intense, unprecedented, continuing program of infrastructure development has been added and applied to the poor relief and infirmary care systems. The level of construction that has taken place in our institutional care system alone in the last 5 years has vastly exceeded anything done over the preceding 130 years of poor relief in Jamaica. Let me repeat that. What we have done in the last 5 years has exceeded anything done over the preceded 130 years of poor relief in Jamaica. With drop-in centers having been built in Hanover, St. Anne, St. Thomas, Trelawney, St. Mary, St. Elizabeth, St. Catherine, new female wards were built at the St. James Infirmary, new male and female wards were built at Portland Infirmary, a new female ward built at the Manchester Infirmary, along with new doctors and nurses station. A new administrative building was constructed in St. Elizabeth. New administrative building was built at Santa Cruz Infirmary. New matron's quarters was built at the Westmoreland Infirmary. A new ward was... Can I stop now? These unprecedented levels of infrastructure development, Mr. President, was implemented at a cost of over $1.4 billion and reflect the work of a government in this instance, led by the Most Honorable Desmond McKenzie, that is totally committed to the vulnerable people as we seek to build back stronger and better, Mr. President. I highlight these issues, as I said before, because the social initiatives impact on the health of our people. And we cannot just fix healthcare by applying medicines, as I mentioned before. A significant portion of the homeless in our streets are those that are impacted by the many ills of society, including especially mental illness, of which substance use is a common, very common consequence. And initiatives have been made to make the lives of these homeless persons better, including a feeding program that was started in March 2020. That is in response to the pandemic that was. And in all parishes, with a cost of over $100 million, and that program is to continue in a structured approach towards the provision of meals to the homeless every day in Kingston and the Church Street Shelter Soup Kitchen. In Kingston. The Church Street Shelter Soup Kitchen was recently renovated and equipped at a cost of $6.3 million and is a hub for the preparation and distribution of meals across the corporate area. Bathroom facilities were built at the Spanish Town Care Center to accommodate the hygienic needs of the homeless at a cost of $2.9 million. And I just reflect on the 6 homeless men who were killed earlier this year, 3 of which who were mentally ill. Senator Gale, initiatives that embrace social cohesion. The solution, Mr. President, for one of the greatest challenges that Jamaica has ever faced, is facing, and we hope not to face much longer, is that of violence and aggression. And to put it simply, the solution to violence for me is play. Just allow people to play, enable people to play, enable children to play, enable teenagers to play, enable adults to play, enable the elderly to play. Make it such that their lives become where they're able to find the time and the avenues to play. And in so doing, Senator Braham isn't here, but I celebrate the green spaces, the emphasis on enhancing the environment in the most downtrodden areas. I see Senator Williams, I see the beautiful murals that are going up. What he's aiming to do downtown. We heard him speak passionately at Minister Tony Johnson's send-off. And it is great. It is really, really a positive thing in the right direction. The UDC Harmony Park that was recently opened up, Festival Marketplace, Phase 2 development in downtown Kingston, the Port Royal Museum, as I mentioned, the historic pathway. And Mr. President, I want to thank you also, because I know that this is near and dear to you, and you also help to execute some of these ideas. These efforts lift the spirit of the people and make hard times that much easier to cope with. Mr. President, out of this crisis, we are, as an administration, seeking to provide a better outlook for our people, building back stronger as we provide social places and spaces for people to recreate and play. Proven solutions to violence, Mr. President. Mr. President, I mentioned with respect to the need for and the emphasis on the community care in terms of the social services that go along with treating the mentally ill, and the need for emphasizing that aspect of it. Sorry. But, Mr. President, there's also the real consequence that happens when we don't address these issues. And I'm just going to make the connection, spell it out, with what we find are the ACEs in society, the adverse childhood experiences. When a child goes through trauma, abuse, those negative experiences in their formative years, the biology behind it is that the cortisol level, cortisol is your stress hormone. The cortisol levels go high. The body at that age is not supposed to have such high levels of cortisol. And what it does is that it also seems to affect the immune system development later because of the high levels of cortisol, making that person probably predisposed to hypertension, diabetes, the cancers, autoimmune diseases. So there's a direct physical link between maladaptive reactions to abusive situations. And I'll say why I say maladaptive. But very hurtful situations have consequences. It is also shown that these individuals end up being the ones who have severe, oftentimes mental illnesses, who are predisposed to subsequent substance use. If you check in the prison system, as the Indicom report related, significant portion of the children are affected by some form of ACE, adverse childhood experience. And so, Mr. President, it is imperative in building back stronger that we focus our efforts to address the needs of especially our most vulnerable children who can be identified if we just look, and enhance the services that are there to treat the ones that are already on the radar. This is one of the long-term solutions, Mr. President, to the crime and violence situation. And the reason I said maladaptive is this other fact, that if a child who is going through the ACEs has one singular positive influence in their life, it can reverse the effects. One single positive influence in their lives can reverse the effect. So we all can make a difference. We all can help to address the issues that we are facing. We all know how we can maybe reach out to such a child. Mr. President, the last aspect that I mentioned in terms of mental health delivery is the spiritual health of our nation. And of our people. And one of the issues that I have as we seek to address issues in crime and violence, we know that there is increased, including as many times addressed by the Prime Minister himself, efforts to fix our families. And in exploring the efforts to fix our families, one of the blaring issues that are there is the absence of a parent or both parents. Child abuse in the form of neglect. Unfortunately, more so paternal neglect. And one of the things that in this chamber where we stand as legislators, and in my unique position kind of straddling two worlds, is I thought, what are maybe some of the legislative things that we can maybe seek to do to help fix the family structure in terms of setting a standard that the country says this is what we would want. And two things that came to my mind, that I'm not a legal luminary, but every citizen that is born in Jamaica is born into a Jamaican family, the Jamaica family. I think that every child born should have an entitlement to two persons being listed on their birth certificate. Every child should have a named mother and father as they enter into our country. Let them feel that embrace. I know that sometimes I have heard cases, I discussed this with a family court judge, and she said, but Saf, what will happen when, like the case that I have, where there's a 14-year-old who is pregnant, and they have tested 4 persons, and they have not yet found the father, Senator Gale. What is going to happen then? And I said, well, in those cases, there must be some sort of parental caregiver responsibility. And 2, we keep looking until we find. And we don't, and we also seek to ensure that we're sending a message that we want a father listed. We want fathers for our children, and we want them to be listed in that way. We have magnificent fathers in our society. You know, this thing of there's no role models to emulate. That's not true. You have some very good fathers, if I may say, in this house here. Right? Me too. You too, yes. Right? We need to address this issue of paternal neglect, maternal neglect, and ladies, don't use access to the child as a tool to get back to the father. Once the child comes into the picture, they are the priority with respect to the time and the exchange. And I just think that we should, just as how we legislatively ensure that there is financial support for a child, and there are avenues that we can seek that, let us seek to ensure emotional support for our children. The other legislative, oh no, those are 2, yes. Another dimension, Mr. President, of the violence in our society is something that our High Commissioner would have been keen to hear. The pandemic in 2020, Mr. President, saw a total of 74,300 fewer persons losing employment in January 2021. 40,200 of these were women, 34,100 were men. The effects of the pandemic have been particularly difficult on women, and this was reflected where the Bureau of Gender Affairs saw a 2-fold increase in the number of women attending its offices asking for help, ranging from leaving an abusive relationship, housing assistance, legal advice, financial assistance, assistance with groceries, household items, counseling, and other services. Increased use of the help center lines, Mr. President. In this last financial year, we also saw the opening of the first National Center for Victims of Gender-Based Violence. And Mr. President, you said gender, when you were making reference to the High Commissioner, gender and women's issues. We champion gender issues, Mr. President, both men and women. It is not just. And in this financial year, apart from that first opening, there are 2 regional shelters that are earmarked for opening. Mr. President, at times the laws of this land unfortunately don't support the victims as much as it should because they have not caught up with the times. With respect to the abuse of especially our women and children and other vulnerable groups, this administration.
All right. You're from a seat other than your own.
Thank you. Mr. President. One minute Busher is still Busher, right, Mr. President? Mr. President, the Speaker's time for speaking has expired. We ask that it be extended for her to...
Very well. The Speaker's time will be extended for 10 minutes to allow for the completion of our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I'm sorry, Senator Fraser-Baines, it's 1 day Busher, not 1 minute Busher.
Take it while you can.
You wear it well. You wear it well.
Thank you, Senator Longmore.
Thank you, President. Thank you, members. With respect to the abuse of especially our women and children and other vulnerable groups, this administration has made it a priority, led by the Honourable Minister Babsy Grange, legislation that seeks to protect our most vulnerable and valuable were addressed. We have seen where there were amendments to the Domestic Violence Act, which include a new definition of domestic violence as not only being physical, but also psychological, emotional, and sexual. The effect of this, Mr. President, is that for the first time, men and women who control their partners through threats by restricting their personal or financial freedom could face sanctions the same way as they would if they were violent physically. We also want to widen the threshold to be met in obtaining protection orders from the court to give greater protection to those who need to keep abusers away in this light. And I will just mention here, Mr. President, in that I wonder about maybe an emergency access service, because I have seen situations where, because the court was closed, the person could not get that order to get the abuser removed. There would be an increased penalty for breach of the protection order from $10,000 to $1 million. Senator Sophie Fraser Binns, we saw with a report of the Joint Select Committee, of which you and I sit, to establish the anti-sexual harassment bill has been submitted, and when that bill becomes law, it will deal a blow to sexual harassment by bringing relief to victims, punishment to perpetrators, and acting as deterrents to others. Financial abuse is one of the most frequent forms of suffrage vulnerable women experience, Mr. President. And so this government seeks to enable, as best we can, financial independence of women. The Women's Entrepreneurship Support Pilot Project will provide 10 grants to vulnerable women to build businesses and achieve their independence. We thank UN Women for partnering in this very important initiative. Mr. President, despite the constraints of the pandemic, we were shocked many times with the levels of crime and violence that still exist in our society. I don't want to think about some of the things that happened. And I just want to try and unravel this quagmire a little bit. The recent Capri report that relates, unfortunately, that only 8% of the Jamaican children's mental health needs are being met. It also relates that homes, schools, communities, children are confronted by high levels of violence and lack of engagement and guidance that are required for optimal development. This lack of guidance leads to violence being perpetrated. Significant substance abuse, high-risk sexual behavior, and suicidality are the coping mechanisms. It speaks to toxic stress. There's a CPFSA report which relates about children living and working on the Jamaican streets. It reports on girls involved in prostitution, and prostitution appears to be a learned or observed behavior. Boys traversing streets in particular areas and are involved in homosexual and bisexual relationships, particularly in Kingston and St. Andrew, St. James, St. Anne, St. Mary, and Westmoreland. Mr. President, I relate to these issues, and I relate to child abuse, and I relate to human trafficking, and I relate to domestic abuse, that there is a commonality. And we must seek to address this as we strive to build back better. The seminal issue here, Mr. President, is the sexuality of our people. This lies at the root of some of the family discord within our society, with many reporting, opinions, recommendations are recognizing the importance of fixing the Jamaican family. And oftentimes, the underpinning factor is something around the sexual health of the individuals involved. Mr. President, sex has always been a taboo subject in our Jamaican space. to be whispered about and to be hidden, to be a secret. But it is ongoing. And Jamaicans are engaging in sex, and quite often in very unhealthy ways and with very grave outcomes. What needs to happen as we seek to build back stronger and we seek to make sure that we fix our society, not just in short-term ways, but in long-term effective solutions, is that we need to address sexual health education. Senator Gill, the World Health Organization defines sexual health as a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to the sexuality, and it is not merely the absence of disease, dysfunction, or infirmity. For far too long, we have had the dire consequences in not ensuring that our children, our young people are able to contemplate sexual engagement, to contemplate contraception, to contemplate abstinence, to plan pregnancies, to deal with STDs, and to essentially have a control in an aspect of their life that is near and dear to them, and that oftentimes is manipulated or taken advantage of. We see where within actions in other countries to address issues of violence in their society, like Mexico, Nigeria, and Pakistan, similarly plagued by crime and violence, there's an increased awareness of the need for those societies to address sex responsibly. Might I suggest we consider the same? Mr. President, in closing, I want to just reflect again on the COVID pandemic. And where we are at this point, Mr. President, the Prime Minister has announced extended hours of business operation. We're slowly trying to seek a new norm. I am a medical doctor. I am aware of the concerns of my colleagues. But colleagues, it takes cash to care. And we need to emerge into a new norm as we seek to build back stronger. We must recognize that efforts are being made to vaccinate our people. And let me at this point recognize the efforts of the Honorable Senator, our own, Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith, in going above and beyond to seek to the needs of our people at this time. I want to emphasize that there is still very significant personal responsibility of every citizen and visitor to our country. Please, if you're feeling sick, do not come to Jamaica. Stay, turn out your yard. I am imploring, I'm asking our diaspora, we're heading into independence, we're heading into the summer holidays. Yes, let us try and see if we can have a cohesive effort to make this work. It is very critical. Our healthcare system is very delicate. We have had good management to this point. Now it is a pandemic. That means everyone is affected, so everyone can help. Wear your masks, sanitize, physically distance. I say physically, not socially. Physically distance. And of course, immune boost. Immune boost, the vitamin C, the vitamin D, the zinc. It helps not just with this variant, but any variant, and with disease in general. Mr. President, in emerging in this new norm, let us continue to enhance our preventative measures as we seek to build back stronger. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Longmore. Minister? Senator Samuda, you are presenting what piece of legislation?
The Extradition Act Amendment, Mr. President.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I suspect this debate will be maybe even shorter than the contribution of colleague Senator Longmore, and certainly less gripping and less engaging. But I have been wrong before. Mr. President, I rise to commence the debate in the Senate on the Extradition Amendment Bill 2021. The rationale for the amendments to the Extradition Act come out of concerns expressed by the U.S. State Department on the difficulty in acquiring the affidavits of victims, particularly in cases of lotto scamming and fraud in extradition proceedings. Mr. President, in recognizing the difficulties which were also shared by the DPP, who agreed with the challenges encountered and to the amendment of the law, the government of Jamaica decided that it would amend the Act to allow for the admission of certain other certified documents in extradition proceedings. It must be pointed out, Mr. President, that the criteria for these certified documents are listed in Article 8 of the 1983 Extradition Treaty between Jamaica and the United States. The provisions extracted from the treaty will be of general application in the Extradition Act. Mr. President, the amendments seek to clarify and amplify the law and will not infringe the rights of any person being sought for extradition, whether to the United States or any country. Mr. President, the amendments will highlight the law on the types of evidence that is accepted in extradition proceedings. The bill seeks to amend the Extradition Act to 1. Provide for the admission of evidence in the form of records of evidence in the case in extradition proceedings, and 2. Allow any judge of the parish court, whether or not that judge is within the same jurisdiction as the person who is being sought for extradition, to issue an arrest warrant for the purpose of committal. Mr. President, the bill was tabled in the lower house on June 8th and passed on June 22nd, with one amendment to rectify an error in the enumeration of Clause 3. I will be bringing another amendment, which I've discussed also with Leader of Opposition Business. Mr. President, the amendments will explicitly allow for the admission of records of the evidence of a case, which will be in addition to the other forms of evidence already permitted under the Act. The bill defines record of the evidence of the case to include, among other things, documents or statements which describe the identity and probable location of the person sought, and statements of the facts of the case, including the time and location of the offense. Mr. President, this definition of record of evidence of the case in the bill is simply a recital of Article 8.2 of the Extradition Treaty with the United States. The amendments to the Extradition Act, Mr. President, do not interfere with the court's inherent power to request more evidence or to deny the request if the evidence presented is not deemed satisfactory or sufficient to accede to the extradition request. Mr. President, I will now highlight the main features of the bill. Clause 2. This clause, Mr. President, repeals and replaces Section 9 of the Act to allow any judge of the parish court to issue an arrest warrant to a person accused of an extraditable offence, regardless of which parish the accused person is thought to be located. Mr. President, under Clause 2, we have an additional amendment which will, to our mind, amend the proposed Section 9.2, and it will read, in the proposed Section 9.2, A, delete the words corresponding offence and substitute therefore the words an extradition offence, and delete the words an offence and substitute therefore the words an extradition offence. Mr. President, I wish to also at this point just acknowledge and thank Senator Shireen Golding for her keen eye in these matters. Though this issue has not come up in previous cases as an issue, it was agreed with the technical team and the policy team that this could potentially be an issue in the future, and we wish to correct any potential mischief in the future. And since we are here doing the work of the people, we may as well get it right. Mr. President, Clause 3. This clause provides for the admission of records of the evidence of a case of a person being sought for extradition. The record of the evidence of the case will include documents, statements, or other evidence which describes the identity and probable location of the person being sought. A statement of the facts of the case, including, if possible, the time and location of the offence. 3. A statement of the provision of the law describing the essential elements and designation of the offence for extradition is requested. 4. A statement of the provisions of the law describing the punishment for the offence. 5. A statement of the provisions of the law prescribing any time limit on the prosecution or execution of punishment for the offence. And 6. Any other relevant documents. The clause also sets out the criteria which records the evidence of the case may be admissible, that is an affidavit from an officer of the investigating authority or prosecutor, and if it is accompanied by a certificate bearing an official stamp or seal by the Attorney General or principal law officer of the approved state. The clause goes on to allow the admission of duly authenticated statements made in depositions, official certificates, judicial documents taken, given or made outside Jamaica to establish direct oral evidence of a fact or opinion in proceedings under this Act. Mr. President, this ends the clause-by-clause summary of the bill before you. I now commend the bill to members of the Senate for their approval and certainly welcome contributions to the debate. I trust they will follow the exemplary example of former colleague Senator Brown Burke in the lower house in their contributions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Marshall, you can use this. Mr. Marshall, use this lectern here. Oh, it has to be sanitized. Not sanitized. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Senator Samuda, thank you very much. Thank you for pointing that out, Minister. Senator Bunting, thank you. You are recognized. In reality, rather than virtually today.
You know, Mr. President, I was enjoying my virtual participation, but I was having a little technical difficulty when you were speaking last week, but it seemed like you were outlining some parameters, some constraints about virtual participation, the abuse, to prevent the abuse of virtual participation, which was never my intention. The bill, Mr. Speaker, Mr. President rather, an act to amend the Extradition Act is, in a sense, shouldn't be controversial. The objectives of making it easier to prosecute extradition proceedings in the case of lotto scamming and other advance fee fraud cases is commendable, because we know that the victims are often elderly persons, almost exclusively, not exclusively, but primarily, very elderly persons who would find it difficult to come to Jamaica, for example, to give evidence in a proceeding here, and who, generally speaking, may not even be very mobile and emotionally able to go through some of the rigors of the evidence collection, etc., without some accommodation being made for their advanced age. We know too that particularly in the West, but I would say all across Jamaica, that the proceeds, the illicit proceeds of lotto scamming and advance fee fraud continues to fuel much of the violent crime that we see. I remember at one point, during my time as minister, the commissioner estimated that over 50% of murders and shootings in the western parishes of St. James, Hanover, and Westmoreland were connected in one way or another with lottery scamming. So this is in all our interests to pass this amendment, and this amendment has the support of the opposition, and any similar amendments, so long as they do not infringe on the rights of the accused. And I should emphasize a point that I think I heard the minister make earlier, that these amendments do not interfere with the court's inherent power to request more evidence or deny the request for evidence, or in weighing up the evidence, deciding that it's insufficient to support the extradition request. With reference to the clause by clause, from what I discussed with Minister Samuda, and from what he said, although I haven't seen the actual typed up, I'd love to see the actual wording of the new amendment which will be introduced. But it shouldn't be a difficulty, because it clears up a potential ambiguity where it refers to corresponding offense, which is actually not a defined term in the Extradition Act. And although I'm looking at it, Minister Samuda, when I read clause 5(1)(b)(2), it speaks there to indicate. Sorry? When I look on the original act, the principal act, the 5(1)(b)(2), clause 5(1)(b)(2), which reads, in the case of an offense against the law of a treaty state, the act or omission constituting the offense or the equivalent act or omission would constitute an offense against the law of Jamaica if it took place within Jamaica, or in the case of an extraterritorial offense in corresponding circumstances outside Jamaica. It seems they may be using that corresponding circumstances and speaking then to a corresponding offense, but it is not clear, and it introduces a potential. This is the only way I can imagine that they come up with the term corresponding offense, which is not otherwise defined. But it introduces a potential ambiguity that could be an obstacle going forward. So I think it's a useful amendment to just stick with the defined terms, extradition offense, and subject to see the actual.
Where are you looking at?
Sorry?
Where?
I was looking at the Principal Act 5(1)(b)(2). So I don't see a problem with that. And also the idea of a judge of any parish court. I mean, oftentimes the subject of the extradition is moving around to avoid being located. And it would be, just for a frustration trying to jump from one parish judge to another to get warrants, depending on where the subject of the extradition request was at a moment in time. So we support that amendment and of both Clause 2 and Clause 3. Just in general, Mr. President, you will recall that some of these issues were raised by then Prime Minister Bruce Golding in 2010, around when the matter of the extradition of Christopher Coke, someone with whom you would be very familiar. I recall. Sorry?
Yes.
Both Mr. Golding and Mr. Coke. Because if I'm not mistaken, you represented him as an attorney at the time. And you will recall, Mr. President, I was also quite involved in the matter when I was in the lower house at the time, in the debates on the matter. But the two issues were raised around one was around the admissibility of evidence, and the second had to do with the sharing of communication intercepts. An amendment was done to the Interception of Telecommunications Act subsequently, fairly quickly, I think before the end of the administration in 2011. And I maintain that while it, in a sense, was an ex post facto justification of the behavior of the administration then, it actually weakens the law enforcement process because it inserts a political policy leader, a minister, in the process of requiring a warrant. So the amendment now required, whereas the security forces used to go directly to a judge, a Supreme Court judge, to get a warrant for the intercepts. If the proceeds or the product of that warrant was to be shared in future with international partners, then prior to or as part of the process of approving the intercept, the Minister of National Security had to sign off. And I had personal experience of that. But I think it was wrong, because I don't think you should insert a political person in the course of the investigation of a criminal. Because we know from that experience how vulnerable to tipping off that process is. How vulnerable to tipping off. And therefore, I think if we're now embarked upon amending the process, we should look at correcting what I believe was a mistake made at that time, to insert during the investigative process, this is collecting evidence, a political, this is before charge, this is before any extradition request is made. You have inserted a political operator in there, which I think brings real risk, or at least perceived risk, to the investigative process. And that risk is the risk of tipping off of the subject of the communication intercept. What is surprising, Mr. President, is that while that limb was corrected so promptly, that this other one has taken 11 years to get around to, whereas and this administration has been in office 7 out of those 11 years. But better late than never, Minister Samura. And so the opposition supports the amendments, and including the one that, we still want to see the actual wording set out, but I don't anticipate any objection to it. Or you have it here now? I think it's a small amendment, but I think every senator has a right to just see it set out clearly, since they would not have had time to cross-reference with the principal act. But with those comments, Mr. President, I'll take my seat.
Minister?
No, if there's no other speaker, there's one more on this side at least. I take it, Mr. President, your silent mean that I'm being acknowledged.
Yes, man. Sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Senator Bunting. Senator Brown?
Mr. President, the memorandum of objection reasons states in part, the amendment to this act will explicitly allow for the admission of records of evidence of the case, in addition to the other forms of evidence already permitted under this act. It will appear to me that this government is making a fundamental change from the views held before when they were in government in 2007 to 2011. I well recall an article appearing in the Gleaner of the 3rd of March 2010 entitled Dudu's Defense. And in that, the then Prime Minister, Mr. Bruce Golding, speaking in Parliament, stated as follows the article. Golding, in a statement to Parliament yesterday, and responding to a scathing report from the U.S. Department of State a day earlier, declared the Jamaican government would not extradite one of its citizens without being provided with a stronger case. And it appeared to me that this legislation is to allow for weaker evidence than that which existed in the 2010 extradition. This represents a turnaround on the part of this government. And I came here today not intended to participate in this debate. But the leader of government business this morning pronounced me an advocate for Dons. And those who live in glass house shouldn't throw stones. I, from this seat, spoke about a story circulated in the international media about some Jamaicans who sought to enter the United States illegally. One of those said, is pure killing going on in Jamaica? I didn't know who the person is, and it doesn't matter who the person is. That's why I talk, because as a citizen of Jamaica, carried on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, the Miami channels, that's the picture of Jamaica that was painted. Now, how does that become a defense of a Don? I'd like to ask this government, have you, under the Extradition Act, which we are debating today, have you filed papers to extradite that person to Jamaica? Are there allegations and charges pending against that person? You shut your mouth, man. So let me put this way. You don't know what you're talking about. I saw your tweet. I saw your irrelevant tweet. So the question is, after you have done so, after you have done so. The issue is, has the government filed extradition for that person? I suspect no. It is easier to go on social media to make noise there than to deal with facts. But, Mr. President, having dealt with the glass house, those who live in glass house, let me be clear that I, too, do not believe that human rights begin at Ligini. And I'm quoting, as you would say, a former prime minister. That constitutional rights did not begin at Ligini. I could read it from the article to, because the article is right here. Right? So, what we're seeing with this piece of legislation is a weakening of the requirements for extradition. I'm not opposing it. But let us be clear, Senator Samuda, that extradition has had a bad history in the country. We could talk about the storyteller Morrison case, and for which a former minister who sat on that side and on this side have said, I regret having done so. But I wasn't the one who was defending storyteller Morrison. So when you say advocate on behalf of Dan, you should have your side look into the mirror, because it wasn't me or this side that defended somebody who was, having been extradited, was convicted. It wasn't this side who, in 2010, went on radio and cried over the extradition of a convicted drug smuggler and gun runner, one who pled guilty and have accepted a sentence of 23 years imprisonment in the United States. And I raise that because there was a lot of debate about the Extradition Act. And I don't know, Senator Samuda, if we fix that in what we have done here. In fact, we've gone the other way, as Senator Bunting pointed out. The intercept which we criticize, and for which the famous Corporal Red Herring was raised. The famous Corporal Red Herring. I can't forget Commissioner Lewin telling us about Corporal Red Herring. I can't forget the Commissioner then, Lewin, talking about people who were turned ashes when the report about the extradition was made. And I can't forget, Minister, I can't forget the defense put up by the government, including statement that the person never visited the United States before. Turned out to be false. I didn't say that. I was on the government side in 2010. But the government put up a stout defense against extradition of a known convicted drug runner and gun runner and torture chamber operator, some say. So let me be clear. Let me be clear. I have a duty in this Senate to bring to our attention even what the devil says, because the devil deserves his due. The devil deserves his due. And if somebody said, pure killing taking place in Jamaica, let us say whether that person is truthful, because, Senator Samuda, over 700 murders have taken place thus far. In only 6 months. And if we continue at that, it's going to be 1,400. More than last year. More than the year before. More than the year before. And certainly more than the 4 years that Senator Bunting occupied the chair as Minister of National Security. So let us not try and condemn as the minister sought the messenger. I only bring to your attention what CNN telling the world, what Fox News telling the world, what MSNBC telling the world, and which you know and I know. So let us be clear. Let us be clear. It matters not who he is. It matters what he said. It matters what he said. And the question, was it true? But nothing did he say compare to what the former Prime Minister in this Parliament said about our allies. Our allies who have urged us to make the amendments according to you, Senator Samuda. This country will never forget constitutional right did not begin in Ligony. It just happened that I was born in Ligony, you know, long before that place came there. And I know that every one of us have constitutional right. Even Senator Campbell thinks that the person is the worst of the worst. Even if you think he's the worst of the worst, he's a Jamaican. He has said some things about our country. Let's face the fact. Was it true or false? Was it true or false? And I make no apology for bringing to our attention in this Senate what people are saying internationally about our country. You know, it's desperate to say, even the fool have him say, but I am concerned about what is happening. So, Senator Hill, it's so nice when you sit in the comfort of government to ignore the reality facing the people of Central Kingston, of St. James, and the rest of the country. So, I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that. And I don't think he heard it either. So, Mr. President, as I said, it wasn't my intention to talk. But as you would say, as you have heard, you quoted from a former Prime Minister, don't draw me tongue. President, don't bring that up. Don't bring that up, President. It is to your shame. It is to your shame, President. It is your shame. And I don't, let me put this here, President. I like a degree of difficulty. I don't like an easy target. And you were just such an easy target when you lost your cool. So I'm comfortable with that. As I said to you, I am bigger than that.
As I sit here,
I am bigger than that.
As I sit here, I have never lost my cool or my temper.
Are you saying what you said was deliberate?
Never.
Are you saying what you said was deliberate?
I have said what I have said. I have never lost my temper.
And I'm sure you're proud of using indecent language from the chair, but I'm comfortable with that.
I must tell you something, you know.
Yeah. Why are we getting into an argument? Why are we getting into an argument? I have no interest in going down that road, President. I have left you in that gutter.
Come on.
I have no interest in going there.
I'm not going down.
I have left you in that gutter.
I am not in any argument.
I wish to take the I wish to take the higher road. I wish to take the higher road.
You don't know what a higher road is when it comes to certain things, you know, Senator Brown.
That is correct. But when it comes to most things, I do know what the upper road is.
When you just about finish, I want to ask you a question.
Mr. President, I just want to extend.
Are you suggesting I need psychiatric assistance?
No, I'm extending an invite to Senator Brown to join us for cake later on. You know, and the rest of the other members on the other side, but especially Senator Brown. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I accept the invitation from the psychiatrist.
That is appointed order.
It's appointed order, and I accept the invitation.
So let's move on, Senator.
I accept the invitation from the psychiatrist. I'm closing, President, because, as I say, these are issues which we must put beyond politics. These are issues where the country's best interests must be put to the front, and where nobody must defend criminals. And neither should anyone, leader or otherwise, sought to defame others. The truth is, the attempt was made to do it to Senator A.J. Nicholson. It backfired. It backfired. It backfired. And so today, when you try, when you said, I am a defender of Dans, today, I'm happy that you have left, and maybe you should stay out. Today, when she got up and said, I am a defender of Dan, they applauded her. They applauded her. Now they're running from the fact that she's been exposed for the hypocrite and the hypocritical position she have adopted, for the lies she told against A.J. Nicholson.
No, Mr. President, on a
That
point
is the
of
reality
order. On
we
a
face.
point of order, Mr. President, I cannot sit here and have Senator Brown call the leader of government business a hypocrite and a liar with no evidence to back it up.
Mr. President, I'd like to move on.
Senator, no, man, you can't just move on.
What do you mean I can't just move on?
You refer to the leader of government business as a hypocrite and a liar, and you're going to withdraw that.
Well, Mr. President, I rest my case on the emails that have been published versus the allegations she made in the Senate against A.J. Nicholson.
Senator Brown.
If that means a visit to the Privilege Committee,
Senator Brown,
I'm prepared to go there.
No, you're not. I'm not referring you to any committee. Yeah. I will simply not recognize you.
President, put this way.
Let me finish now. You have referred to the leader of government business as a hypocrite and a liar.
Let me withdraw that. I refer to her, I now say her statements were hypocritical, and I stand by that. Mr. President, you have long not recognized me. With the expletives you use against me, that is sufficient non-recognition.
You have withdrawn the designation of the leader of government business as a hypocrite
and
and
liar.
liar.
Substitute her statement as being hypocritical and untruth about Senator A.J. Nicholson. I close by saying I was the one who stood on the wrong side of history relative to the extradition of that famous Jamaican citizen in 2010. No man, famous for them. May it please you, Mr. President, I was provoked, but those who live in glass house must not throw stone.
Just to be perfectly clear for my own edification, you have said that you stand by the statement that you made about the persons that you refer to as boat people. You stand by that. The persons that you refer to as boat people, boat, B-O-A-T, boat, you stand by that statement.
President, let me be clear.
I'm just asking you,
Yeah, that's what I'm going to clarify for you.
You stand by it.
Let me clarify for you. What I said is that somebody among the boat people said pure killing taking place in Jamaica.
No, man,
I didn't endorse their position.
You went further than that, man.
Let me finish.
I'm just trying to get to understand.
And I'm trying to clarify, but you will never get it unless you allow me to. Yeah. Well, bring it up now so that we can do. I have said here.
Just asking you if you stand
by those words. Because you are deliberately. Well, let me withdraw deliberately. You are misconstruing.
You can leave the word deliberately.
No. You are misconstruing the comments I made. And my comments, and I stand by the comments I made, that one of the persons made that comment about Jamaica, pure killing taking place here. It was carried on national television in Jamaica. It was carried on TV abroad. And I simply repeated for our attention that point. I am not endorsing any individuals because I am not one who is going to cry if he is extradited. I am not one who is going to cry if he is convicted and charges are brought against him and convicted. But let us not deny that he was captured on TV saying these things. At the time, I didn't even know who he was. But as far as I'm concerned,
you don't follow something. All I'm saying to you now, and I said it to... Yeah. Anyway, all I'm saying, if you don't know who the person is, wait and find out.
No. No.
No problem.
Something was said about my country. Something was said about my country, and I felt it my duty to bring it to
So you stand by everything
I'm
you
not
said.
an investigator.
That's all I wanted you to. I just wanted to know.
I asked the question earlier. Are you going to extradite him?
I just want to know.
I will support your effort to extradite him.
No problem. I just wanted to know if you stand by those utterances.
President, I make it clear. I quoted the person. I will quote the person again, just as CNN, MSNBC, Fox, TVJ, and other stations have done so. I have made that clear. The problem the government faces is that it believes it's beyond criticism, and not from this side. This side is not of that view. We are going to hold you to the feet of accountability. Go and extradite that person, is what I have said. Go and extradite the person.
Gotcha.
Under this act. But above all, remember where you all stood in 2010 when it came to the extradition of that famous person from Tivoli Gardens.
Look here, my memory is so long that I remember where everybody stand. My memory is crystal clear. From 1980 come right up. I remember where everybody stand. Absolutely. Minister?
Can I get the lectern, please? No, I'm not sure I can. Excuse me. Can I get the lectern, please? Yes.
It's a disgrace, Mr. President.
And you are done with disgrace.
Yeah, man. You're bringing on the Senate.
So you can say anything you want about me, that's okay.
That's all right.
We didn't say anything about him. He get him and start talking.
Senator Albin Hill and Senator Scott Motley. Minister Samuda.
Thank you, Mr. President. I certainly know we stand on the right side of history with the amendments before us this afternoon. And I know certainly where I stand, and I know my own conscience. Mr. President, and, I think it's useful. Matthew 7:15 says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves," Mr. President. And may seem a stretch, but considering the last contribution to the debate, it, I think, was necessary to remind us of that piece of scripture. Mr. President, we can go back and forth, because in the same breath, Matthew 7:5 says, "You hypocrite, you first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take and speak, and to take the speak out of your brother's eye." Now, but fortunately, I have the benefit of closing the debate, so I no longer have to go back and forth. However, Mr. President, I think important, Clause 2 of the bill is simply restating the existing law in the Extradition Act. It's unfortunate, and I'll get into the politics very briefly, but I'll just go through the points raised related to the bill, as few as there were. Senator Brown, you were unfortunately woefully misguided in your interpretation of the points, certainly from my perspective, and the actual amendments. The bill does in no way weaken the law. Mr. President, it is important to remember that the accused will not be tried in Jamaica. The court and the minister must be convinced from the evidence that the accused has committed an extradition offense in the requesting state. I noted Senator Bunting's comment about 7 and 11 years and whether or not the political directorate should have been inserted. I certainly don't share your view on the issue, whereas I understand why you have said so. The only point I would make to you is that though the PNP would have been the administration for 4 out of the 11 years, you would have had direct. If it was so offensive, I think you would have had adequate time to re-amend it or repeal the amendment. Should you have had the interest? So I think, there's, well, there you go. But the adequate time would have been there should it be so offensive to repeal the amendment, as it would not have been a significant piece of drafting to get that done, should it have been seen to be so offensive. And failed at so many, which is why the people put you on that side. However, Mr. President, the court and the minister, as I said, Mr. President, and for the Hansard, must be convinced from the evidence that the accused has committed an extradition offense in the requesting state. Mr. President, there was 30% less crime under the first 4 years of his administration and under your tenure. Overall, you're not judged by one metric. That is a fact. That is a fact. However, Mr. President, the bill before us, as the amendments have brought, it brings it in line with other nations in the Commonwealth, including Canada and New Zealand. In fact, the Canadian bill goes further by explicitly allowing hearsay evidence. We have not chosen to do that, Mr. President. We must also ensure reciprocation. States have been responsive to our request on bare bones evidence, Mr. President. And we believe that we are heading in a way that brings us in line with our partners, not just one partner. We are and have been a party to the treaty, which is set out in the law, and this also ensures that the treaty is not offensive to our legislation. Mr. President, you will also note that the law makes specific reference to the treaty. We have done all the necessary exercises, and the bill, we believe, Mr. President, and its amendments pass all the relevant constitutional tests. Mr. President, this bill and its amendments and the intention should not be understated. We believe it corrects a particular issue. It corrects an issue that we believe exists, and we have seen in cases that exist in relation to extradition cases, specifically to lotto scammers, Mr. President. And you would have noted, and I hadn't heard that statistic before, Senator Bunting, the one that you'd have referred to a briefing you'd have received, 50% of murders and shootings related to lotto scamming in the West. I'm not sure if it was related specifically to St. James or just generally the Western, the tri-parish space, which is specifically why I know we stand on the right side of history as it was related to the use of SOE measures in that tri-parish space, because the issue was so grave and is still so grave. And Mr. President, this is specifically why I know we stand on the right side of history this afternoon, Mr. President. It is specifically why I know colleagues on that side would have stood on the wrong side of history as it relates to their interaction and to the involvement of one Bebe in the former, the constituency executive of the People's National Party in West Central St. James, Mr. President. So we stand on the right side of history this afternoon, Mr. President. And I am comfortable, and I sleep comfortable. Now, I will make a point as it relates to Senator Brown's I didn't talk you down in your presentation, so I would appreciate if you don't do that here. No, common courtesy, Senator Bunting. I know you as a courteous man. I don't think you should step out of that space. Mr. President, the contribution to the debate, those sections of it related to the bill before us, related to, what's his name again? The Don that was on the boat running up his mouth. Someone that would have contributed to the very crime issues in this country chose to go and use his camera time to further defile the country that we all, I believe in here, love dearly. Now, what you have not accepted, Senator Brown, and it is my firm position, that you are wrong for the simple reason that someone who would have defiled this country in many ways, and that has been proven in the court of law, you chose to reiterate and try to have it republished. And Mr. President, in the same way foreign media, though, just as the way the media is, when you make a correction, a front page correction is rarely made on the front page. So even though corrections have been made in the international media, your attempt to reiterate the comments of those who have defiled this country that we all love so well should be withdrawn. And that is my firm position, Mr. President. And Mr. President, I do not believe that there is much in the clauses that give concern to colleagues on either side of the aisle. I, as I said, know where I stand, and because we are charged this afternoon with looking at legislation that affects our citizens, I ask that we move to close the debate and pass the bill so that we stand on the right side of history. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator, you're asking for... Yes, the question, I think, from the Minister is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favour? Aye. Against?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Extradition Act to provide for the admission of evidence that would not otherwise be admissible under Jamaican law in the form of records of evidence of the case in extradition hearings and for connected matters, read a second time.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill, clause by clause. Senator Bunting, please pay attention to what is happening in the Senate. I put clause 1. Those in favour? Against? I put clause 2. Those in favour? Against?
Mr. President,
yes.
The amendment would have been circulated to clause 2.
What? Senator, the amendments are in where? Clause 2?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, so let me just go. I put clause 1. Clause 2 we will recommit.
Right.
Minister, I believe that there are or is an amendment, 2 significant amendments to clause 2. They have been circulated. Are you asking them for them to be taken as read?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
Mr. President, I just want some clarification, because the amendment is supposed to be...
Sorry, so Minister, is this the amendment? Yes, you don't get this?
Can I be given a copy of it?
So, Mr. President.
I'm not respected, but at least I'm still a senator until my undated letter is signed.
I'm not understanding it, sir. I don't know if I'm missing something.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I
go ahead. So there's an amendment to clause 2 which the Minister will explain and subsequently.
So, Mr. President, if one is to refer to the Principal Act and refer specifically to Section 9.2, it reads, a warrant of arrest under this section may be issued upon such information as would be, in the opinion of the magistrate, authorize the issue of a warrant for the arrest of a person accused of committing, and it reads now as it is, a corresponding offence, or, as the case may be, of a person alleged to be unlawfully at large or conviction.
No. You don't need to go any further. So what I must reference is not what you have here, but go back to the principal bill.
So we're using the amendment bill here to amend, to create further amendment to the Principal Act.
That I did not get from your earlier.
Oh, understood. So I hope I
am very clear now.
Okay, understood.
Okay, so I can put the amendment. So I will put the.
Sorry, Chair. I got the impression that we were debating this bill before us. The minister is moving beyond this bill to amend the Principal Act.
So, Mr. President, the bill. No, but if you, I think I could assist and save us. So, the bill before us is an amendment bill to amend the Principal Act. We're using the opportunity to amend the amendment bill before us to correct a potential issue in the future, Mr. President. So it is intended to include under clause 2 the words which have been circulated.
Yeah, and Chairman, I think this is a little chaka. Because the bill we got last week didn't contain this clause. And we had no indication that they intended to further amend the principal bill.
So, Mr. President, please continue.
Yeah. That they intended to amend further the Principal Act. And we've got very short notice on this, without us being able to look at the Principal Act and ourselves propose other amendments which we might have won. But the leader of opposition business have indicated a willingness. But I'd urge the government not to do things so chaka in the future.
You know, I hear that word being used all over the place.
So, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, just in response
I'm trying to assist you. Minister, what you're amending here is the clause under the bill that amends Section 9. So it's not a completely new amendment. All in the bill amending the Principal Act, you are changing two terms. One is a corresponding offense, which is not a defined term in the Principal Act.
Either under the definitions of Section 5.
With the term an extradition offense, which is a defined term in the Principal Act. And the second reference in that subclause, an offense, again, you are replacing it with the defined term, an extradition offense.
Agreed.
That is as simple as it is.
Which Mr. Chairman?
I think in our crosstalk, it has been made more complicated.
Perhaps.
It has come across as more complicated than it actually is.
So Mr.
Chairman.
1 minute. In the first, all what you are doing is removing you're removing the word
corresponding offense and replacing it with extradition offense.
Yes, that's 9.2a. And
yes.
9.2b, you're deleting the word an offense and substituting the word an extradition.
Correct,
offense.
President. So, I apologize if I darken anyone's light.
To quote a former Minister of National Security, it's pellucidly clear.
Pellucidly. No, he quoted accurately.
No, don't tell me that. See the gentleman sit down beside you there. Is him you to tell, not me.
Which, Mr. Chairman, the Leader of Opposition Business had very clearly laid out when he presented. So I don't know if we weren't all listening at the time,
Okay,
but
good.
he
So
acknowledged what the change was.
So since everybody is now quite clear, I put the amendment to the amendment of Clause 2. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I put Clause 2 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I put Clause 3. Those in favor? Against? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 2 amendments. Those in favor? Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 2 amendments. Minister? Minister is asking that the bill be read for a third time. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. President.
The question is that the bill be read for a third time. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Extradition Act to provide for the admission of evidence that would not otherwise be admissible under Jamaican law in the form of records of evidence of the case in extradition hearings and for connected matters, read a third time and passed.
Thank you very much. And quite appropriately, it's 1:22. So I would have a motion, please, Leader.
Mr. President, might the Senate be permitted to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
Against?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, allow me to start by just apologizing to the staff of the Parliament and for any viewers in the Jamaican public for losing my temper in this Senate. Sadly, I do not regret what I said, but I do regret losing my temper. I apologize to my colleagues as well if my comportment was not as it should be. Mr. President, the matter before us is now the Legal Aid Fees, Validation and Indemnification Act 2021. It is, Mr. President, known that under Jamaican law, under Jamaican law.
Sorry, Minister, this is the last bit of work you're doing for the afternoon?
It is. Every person charged with a criminal offense is entitled to defend himself in person or through legal representation of his own choosing, or if he does not have sufficient means to pay for legal representation, to be given such assistance as is required in the interest of justice. Beyond our Legal Aid Act, as a signatory to the major international human rights treaties, Jamaica's obligation to offer its citizens access to legal aid is also grounded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the American Convention on Human Rights. These documents illustrate the universal acceptance that the state is primarily responsible for providing non-discriminatory, accessible legal aid, especially for individuals who lack financial means to pay for such service. Mr. President, the Constitution also guarantees a fair hearing to each person charged with a criminal offense and also directs that that person should be presumed innocent until proven guilty or has pleaded guilty. So that the provision of legal aid is important even in cases where the accused is facing multiple charges for heinous crimes and or where the accused is said to be involved in a major criminal enterprise. It is in this context that the Legal Aid Fees, Validation and Indemnification Act 2021 comes before us, as the bill seeks to validate payments made to attorneys at law who provided legal aid services in the Queen versus Uchenz Wilson and others, as well as in the matter of the Queen versus Carlington Godfrey and others. Mr. President, in early 2019, 34 persons were arrested and charged with offences under the Criminal Justice Suppression of Criminal Organizations Act, more commonly referred to as anti-gang legislation, for the commission of gang-related activities. And these persons were allegedly part of major organized criminal networks dubbed the Uchenz Wilson Gang and the Kings Valley Gangs. When these persons appeared before the court, they sought assistance for their defense under the Legal Aid Act. The Legal Aid Council encountered difficulties in assigning suitable attorneys to provide legal aid services to the accused persons in these matters, given the magnitude of the trial, the complexity of the issues, and the length of the trial, and the anticipated length of the trial. The attorneys at law indicated that a trial of this nature would require considerably more resources than the tariff of fees prescribed under the Legal Aid Act afforded, and the trial could not commence as the defendants were unrepresented, and this ultimately threatened the defendants' right to a fair trial. So, having regard for the rule of law, the Minister of Justice convened consultations between the Legal Aid Council and attorneys at law, and ultimately made arrangements for representation for the accused. Due to the extraordinary circumstances and the unprecedented nature of the trial and the need for urgent action to ensure justice for the defendants, the tariff of fees was varied and the payments were made to the attorneys at law in respect of services rendered in the two cases I named earlier. Mr. President, payments to the attorneys in the Uchenz Wilson matter were made in 5 stages between March 2019 and December 2020, based on the fees set out in the schedule before us. Similarly, the trial for Carlington Godfrey and others lasted for 6 months from January 2020 to July 2020, and the payments were made to 14 attorneys in December 2020. Mr. President, in summary, the duration of both the Uchenz Wilson and Carlington Godfrey trials was 25 months, with a combined total of 34 defendants. A combined total of 42 attorneys at law represented the defendants in both trials. Mr. President, the bill now seeks to validate the payment of fees made under the varied tariff and to indemnify persons liable to be proceeded against in respect of those payments. The bill was tabled in the Lower House on June 8th. It was passed on June 22nd with no amendments. Just highlighting this very short bill, Clause 2 declares that the payments in good faith by the Legal Aid Council and all persons acting on behalf of or in support of the Legal Aid Council made to attorneys at law in the R versus Uchenz Wilson and others, and to those in the R versus Carlington Godfrey and others, are valid and lawfully done. And Clause 3 provides that every person liable to be legally proceeded against on the grounds that the payments were not lawfully made is freed, acquitted, and indemnified. So the standard language in such bills. Mr. President, the schedule speaks for itself in terms of the fees applied for the first 30 days of trial and each subsequent 30-day period of trial, and is in its essence a demonstration of the intent to uphold the constitutional right of every single Jamaican, especially, of course, the right to due process before the law and a fair trial. I therefore now commend the Legal Aid Fees, Validation and Indemnification Act 2021 for the Senate's consideration and approval.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, it is inevitable that we would have had to come to this, and it is only regrettable that it's not the entire act which is being reviewed, because there are some flaws in it. The original legal aid, I don't know how to reference it, but it was actually a limited liability company formed in or about 1971, I think, by a group of attorneys who recognized that there was need to provide a system of representation for persons who could not afford it. And I remember that Dennis Daly, of blessed memory, was one of those who were particularly involved in it. It was a time when a vast number of attorneys were not motivated by aspirations of wealth, but aspirations of service, motivated by understanding that there were people who were oppressed, people who were vulnerable, people who were persecuted and prosecuted who needed some legal assistance. I remember very well that those of us who came to maturity in the 70s, there was a chambers called Freedom Chambers. And those of us who sought to serve the country and serve the people of the country tried to get into Freedom Chambers, where people like Dennis Daly and Ronnie Thwaites and Richard Small and others would take on cases without, just because they were protecting the constitutional rights of the citizens of this country, rather than looking at the fees. And I think the legal aid system is very admirable, because at the end of the day, access to justice is one of the most valued things in any country. The fact of the matter is there are some hallowed principles which we hold dear in the legal profession. And indeed, it impacts the entire fabric of our society. And one of them is a presumption of innocence. I know that under the Legal Aid Act, there is no discrimination about if you have a conviction that you can't get legal aid for another one. It doesn't require that this must be your first offense for which you're before the court. And so what it shows us is that even if you have been found guilty of an offense, that the way in which our country and the laws and the principles have evolved is that you still have the presumption of innocence with anything else. And it is interesting that in this Yushin gang case, if I'm not mistaken, it is one of the alleged gang members who was selected by the prosecution to give evidence against the others. So there is value in words which come from the mouth of somebody who it is alleged has committed an offense, or it is alleged that is a member of a criminal gang. And no one should be condemned for their past because of what they say in their present. We do know that.
Good point.
It is also very curious that one of the things that we hear consistently is that gang members make vast sums of money from their enterprises. Often, fingers are pointed at gang members and lot of scammers, and we have told that they've built up a vast arsenal of wealth, because wealth can be weaponized. But in this case, they were given, all of these persons charged with the offenses were granted legal aid. And one of the requirements under the Legal Aid Act, which I think is honored in the breach, is that you ought to do a means test to see if the person is deserving of legal aid. So this actually makes one question some of the assertions which have been made about gang members, and even if the allegations against persons are really true. As it turned out, there were no convictions in this matter. And as I have pointed out, and has been pointed out in some of our committees, although there have been 448, I think, persons put before the court, under the suppressions of crimes. I'm sorry, I'm misleading, and I do not do so intentionally. Under this particular act under which they were charged, only two persons were convicted because they pleaded guilty. So, Mr. President, yes, in a trial of this magnitude and with the level of expertise which was required to ensure that all the persons charged had an opportunity for their case to be heard justly and for justice to be done, it took considerable effort and a great deal of time. And my only regret is that it did not yield the kinds of results which we had anticipated. So we understand the reason for this bill, an act to validate and confirm as lawful the payment of fees in variance as to amount of fees prescribed under Section 24 of the Legal Aid Act, and to provide for indemnification in respect of such payment. And perhaps, Minister, we need to embark on an approach to matters of this sort, because as time goes by and the value of the money diminishes, we won't want to have to come back to look at it. So I am advocating that we have the commitment which has been made actually put into place, and we have a total overall, a look at some of the legislation to see how we can actually review and improve it. Just a final word, that one of the things that internationally has been recognized is that as a result of COVID, access to justice becomes more difficult for people, especially women. The door was barely open for them, and now it is sometimes totally closed. And we have to consider it, because although for the most part we give legal aid in criminal matters, for the most part, I'm not saying that there are not other services which are given from time to time, but those aspects of it, the civil aspects of it, also need to be examined. Because when you look at a matter filed in court and you see, a recovery of possession or something like that, which sounds remote, a probate or something like that, it is not really just limited to what is before the court. It is about people's lives, sometimes generational lives. It is about a lot of pain and anguish that people experience, but they just can't afford it. They just can't afford the fees. And whereas I have a vested interest in earning fees, I also have a strong interest in ensuring that those who need it can access it. And so I encourage people to use the means test, which is intended to be a guide for matters under the Legal Aid Act. I support the bill, the opposition does. Mr. President, if it pleases you.
Thank you, Senator Scott Martin. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Senator Scott Motley for her support of the bill. Mr. President, just to indicate in response to the comments made, however, I know that the Senator will be pleased to note that the tariffs are already being reviewed, and that there will be a category for cases with an unusual number of defendants, such as the ones which were the subject of the bill before us. There is also review now being undertaken for the inclusion of certain civil aspects to bring them rather into operation. So that these are two important changes that will come forward. But it had been indicated that it would be important to address the indemnity to protect those who took what could be described as a brave decision in the interest of justice, ensuring that due process took place. Mr. President, in that context and understanding that there are no amendments being proposed, I just wish to ask for a second reading of the bill.
Members, you have heard the question. Those in favour? Against? The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole.
A bill entitled An Act to Validate and Confirm as Lawful the Payment of Fees in Variance as to amount of fees prescribed under Section 24 of the Legal Aid Act and to provide for indemnification in respect of such payments, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Thank you very much. I put clause 1 through to 3. Those in favour? Against? I put the schedule. Those in favour? Against? Thank you. I put the preamble. Those in favour? Against? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favour? Against? The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favour? Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Might I ask for third reading of the bill?
Thank you. Those in favour? Madam Clerk?
A bill entitled An Act to Validate and Confirm as Lawful the Payment of Fees in Variance as to amount of fees prescribed under Section 24 of the Legal Aid Act and to provide for indemnification in respect of such payments, read a third time and passed.
Minister, please.
President,
1 minute, please.
Mr. President, if I might just ask for a motion on the suspension of the State of the Nation debate. I would just ask that that question be put to the Senate.
The question is that the State of the Nation debate be suspended for a date to be fixed. Those in favour? Against?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is not intended to do any further business today. Might I ask for the Senate to be adjourned for a date to be fixed?
Thank you very much, Minister. The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favour? Against? This Honourable Senate now stands adjourned.